Welcome to Mission Majjhima. Ajahn.
Ajahn.
So Ajahn, tell us about Majjhima Nikaya 59, the Bahuvedanīya Sutta.
So in this sutta on the many kinds of feeling, we encounter at the beginning a very familiar scene, perhaps, of two people arguing. They've got different views. So we have Udayan, who's a monastic, and Panchakanga, who's a carpenter, and they're basically disagreeing. Udayan says, the Buddha taught three kinds of feeling: sukha, dukkha, and neither sukha nor dukkha. So pleasant, unpleasant, and that which is neutral, or neither of the first two. And Panchakanga says, no, the Buddha taught two types of feeling, sukha and dukkha. And then Udayan says his point again, Panchakanga says his point. It goes back and forth three times. And there's basically just no listening to the other and no acknowledging of any perhaps rightness on the other person's side. So Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, hears this and reports it to the Buddha and says, actually there is a way, the way that Udayan said it, that is a true presentation. I have taught the Vedana, or feeling tone, as being of three types, of sukha, dukkha, and neither sukha nor dukkha. And Panchakanga is also right. I have taught the Vedana, or feeling, as being of two types, of sukha and dukkha. And I've also taught it in terms of 5 types of Vedana, or 6 types of Vedana, or 18 types of Vedana, or 36 types of Vedana, or 108 different types of Vedana. And just as an aside, this is basically the one time in the Pali Canon where we have this number 108 given any kind of special significance, which it has in other Buddhist traditions, and is the number of beads you find in modern malas. But the Buddha then goes to just say that it's not good, it's inappropriate for when you're discussing the Dhamma or discussing things with someone else to not acknowledge when something has been well said. So you should really try to listen to other people and acknowledge when something has been well said. And then he goes to elaborate what can be conceived of as a hierarchy of pleasure. So at the bottom talks about sensual pleasures, the 5 chords of sensuality. That is the sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, 5 chords, which are agreeable, liked, pleasing, which are provocative of lust and endearing. So that's how most people get most of their pleasure most of the time. And some people might think that's the extent of happiness or of sukha. This is as good as sukha gets, is the beautiful, lovely things of the world, the great tastes of the world, the beautiful sounds, the choruses of the world. That's as good as the world gets. That's as good as things can get. But such a person is wrong. They just haven't experienced that which is higher. What is higher? The sukha, the happiness, the bliss, the sukha of the first jhana, which is having put aside sensuality, having put aside unwholesome states, one enters upon and abides in the first jhana, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation, with sukha and piti sukha, joy and rapture, accompanied by singleness of mind. And some people might think that's the highest pleasure, that's the highest sukha of the world, but they shouldn't think that. They just think it because they haven't known anything higher. What's higher? The second jhana. What's higher than the second jhana? The third jhana. What's higher than the third? The fourth. What's higher than the fourth is the base of infinite space. Higher than that, the base of infinite consciousness. Higher than that, the base of nothingness. Higher than that, more sublime than that, more refined than that. We're getting to more and more subtle, more and more refined levels of sukha, heavenly, more and more heavenly, higher and higher states of happiness and of sukha. What comes higher than that is the sukha of the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. And what's higher than that is the sukha of attainment of cessation. And then someone might say, how does that work? How can you have pleasure or happiness which is in this sphere of the cessation of Vedana, of feeling and non-feeling? And the answer the Buddha gives to that is that the Buddha talks about the sphere of sukha is not just the sphere of sukha Vedana, or pleasant feeling. The Buddha talks of happiness or pleasure as any and everywhere that sukha can be found, not just in the senses. So would you like to draw anything out in that hierarchy or otherwise in the sutta?
I think the hierarchy of bliss is a great term for it. And the fact that the Buddha basically, you're right. A few things. One is him saying that, yes, there's different ways of phrasing dharmic principles. There's no need to get caught on the details. And if one is insisting on not acknowledging sort of a dharmically grounded statement from another, even if the phrasing is different, then it's going to lead to arguments. And just, this noting of how many kinds of feelings he has taught in the past, I just think that tells us a little more about how we can hold at least some of the discourses and teachings, especially with one another when we're talking about them. But then this hierarchy of sukha or of bliss is brilliant, because not only does it talk about this hierarchy, but at the very end, it's a fascinating phrase. Wherever one finds sukha, that the Tathagata defines as sukha. Wherever one finds happiness, there the Buddha defines happiness. Even if it's equanimity or lack of feeling, literally, the cessation of feeling. So for me, it's this implicitly circular definition. And in Majjhima Nikaya 13, the Mahadukkha Khandha Sutta, the Buddha says the apex of feeling is lack of suffering. And yet, this circular definition of dukkha, or of sukha rather, where everyone finds sukha, that is sukha. It's intentionally circular, I think, because the definition of sukha and dukkha changes as we practice. Initially, going out to a bar is happiness, and then it's suffering as the mind refines. And, as you said, this hierarchy of bliss is like a ladder, and as we pull ourselves up to a new rung of sukha and pull ourselves past it, it becomes dukkha, and there's a new rung of sukha to grab onto. And it's a malleable term for a reason, because it is this movement. And in the basically the pair of dyads sutta, in the Sutta Nipata, the Buddha says that what the noble ones think of as pleasure, the world sees as suffering, and what the world sees as suffering, or pleasure, the noble ones see as suffering. Just a really useful principle to know that these terms shift over time, and the Buddha's brilliance in kind of allowing for that with an intentionally circular definition. And just to look at how that hierarchy of bliss is working for us as we give up samisa sukha, worldly, fleshly happiness, the 5 cores of sensual pleasure, and move towards niramisa sukha, which is spiritual happiness of the jhanas, of loving kindness, of the unsullied bliss, of sense restraint, of the blameless bliss, anavacca sukha, of virtue. These become sustaining. Ajahn, what else would you speak to in this discourse?
Just 2 other points along this hierarchy of bliss is to point out that the spectrum of sensual pleasure before the first jhana, it's not just that it's entirely, absolutely base and utterly irredeemable. The Buddha did talk about the dangers of kama sukha and said that actually you should be really wary of kama sukha, the pleasure of sensuality. But within that frame, you do have like the pleasure of taking heroin, on the low end of that. All the pleasures of addiction. The Buddha did say, there is some gratification in sensual pleasure. If there wasn't, then people wouldn't become addicted to it. But there is some measure, but there's just so much drawback of it. But as we practice, we still, until we attain, the bliss of samadhi, or the bliss of insight, the bliss of awakening, we're still kind of on this sensual, we're getting our hits from the world of the senses, but we get better at it. We realize this anavajja, as you're talking about, the bliss or the happiness which is blameless, is still like the happiness of generosity is kind of on the refined end of this sensual scale. And it's not yet a fully safe abiding, but it's much better than this very coarse end. When we when we figure out the happiness of morality, of having integrity, of being generous, of a clean livelihood, that is great. And we should more and more lean into that. That can be some level of refuge. It's just not a totally, utterly safe refuge like concentration is leaning in the direction of. And just to point out that Nibbana is the highest sukha. Nibbanang paramang sukhang. Nibbana is the highest sukha. Some people say, Nibbana is not pleasurable sensation, but it is the highest happiness, the highest pleasure in the sense of the highest sukha. So I think those things are worthy of noting.
Ajahn, what's the word of the week?
The word of the week is Vedana, or feeling tone, hedonic tone. It's the initial, very tactile spectrum of feeling, whether that's pleasant, painful, or neutral. And it is a mental, like Vedana is a mental thing, but it covers the realm both of physical feeling felt by the mind and mental feeling felt by the mind.